Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of The Invisible Men. I'm Night Q with my dear brother Ian, and
Hey,
we have an exceptional guest today, a gentleman that I've had the pleasure of meeting a couple of times, Professor Gerald Early, who is the Merrill Kling Professor of Modern Letters at Washington University in St. Louis. Many of you, I expect, are aware of his work. He's published many books on many aspects of American life and society. The book that we're going to focus on today is one of my favorites. It's exceptional. Play Harder: The Triumph of Black Baseball in America. He is also, you may have met him not through his books, but has in fact worked on five of Ken Burns's seminal documentaries on American society. And we are thrilled to have you here, Professor.
welcome, Professor Early. It's
Great to
such a
be
great
here.
honor to have you.
It's great to be here. Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, but before we jump into the Professor Early of being the professor of modern letters, the author, can you help us a little bit and help our audience get a sense of you, in your early years, and in particular, when did you discover that race was a thing, that it had meaning either in your life or in the perception of others towards you? But can you recall when that occurred for you?
That's an interesting question. I think probably um, when I was about maybe 7 or 8 years old, probably I got a sense about race. Up until that time, I don't think I really thought about race at all. I grew up in a very mixed neighborhood. I knew a lot of white children and everything. And I don't think race was really much of a matter in our interactions. It was about when I was 7 or 8 years old, my mother, who was a widow, started going out with a black police officer. And the black police officer talked a lot about black men on the police force and about black people committing crime. And I think that was the first time I really got some sense about about racial difference was when I heard him talking about the status of black police officers, black people committing crime, and that sort of thing, and racism in society, which he talked about quite a bit. And but I don't think personally I encountered it until maybe I was about 9 or 10 when I first heard the N word. I first remember vividly hearing the N word when I was about 9 or 10. I grew up with with a lot of Italian kids, and one of them got mad at a friend of mine and called him the N word, and I was kind of shocked because I thought this Italian kid was a friend of ours and everything, and I was really kind of shocked when he used this word, and I was deeply disappointed. Uh, it it was one of those things where you lose your innocence a little bit. One of those things happen,
Mm.
and you kind of lose your innocence a little bit. But hearing adults talk about their work, and particularly the black police officer my mother was dating, gave me a real sense about, started giving me an education about race, the complexities of race in our society.
And was he talking about black people committing crimes disproportionate? What aspect? What was it he raising about black people and crime?
Well, he was raising a couple of things. One was that black people, yes, he did say black people committed crimes disproportionately and said that they ought to stop. That was his answer to that, was that they ought to stop. Um, and he felt it hurt the black community, and he thought that the black community could do better. And he didn't understand why people were doing that. He also told me something that really struck me. He said, being a police officer, a black person as a police officer, is a real step up for our race. For a long time we couldn't, we couldn't be a police officer. Now, we have black people being police officers. It's a step up and everything. And then he said to me, I hope, my hope is not that you would become a police officer, but that things would be even better for you and you would do something even more with your life than being a police officer. But he said he was a firm believer that things were getting better for black people. He'd always keep saying that things are getting better, things are getting better. And so he really emphasized that quite a bit. Um, but he also talked about corruption in the police department and how the police department favored white officers over black, and that it was difficult to become a detective, and problems with the exam and things like that. That he felt that there were things in the police department that worked against black people moving up the ladder in the police department. But he was very proud of being a police officer. He thought it was a very important job.
And what city? What city were you raised in? Where was all?
Philadelphia,
Okay.
the city of brotherly love.
Well, and of course, there's a whole section in the book about Philadelphia and the
Yeah.
Phillies, and
Yes.
some of
Yeah.
the racial challenges there, which
Yeah.
we'll get into in a
Yeah.
bit. So, when was it that when was it that you got the academic bug? You know, that led you on a path to become this renowned professor. How early did that happen, or late?
Well, I think I might have been thinking about it a lot. I have two older sisters, and they both went to college, and so they really encouraged me to go to college too, and that was important. And they thought I was pretty bright. I didn't think I was nearly as bright as they thought I was, but they thought I was pretty bright. And so they said, "Oh, you can become something. You could become a professor or something like that." That seemed like a real long shot to me, becoming a professor. But they really encouraged it. They really always encouraged me to read, and I don't think I would have developed the way I did today if they hadn't encouraged me to read. They encouraged me to read from the time I was a little kid. They would take me over to the library, and they would read to me. They would give me books to read. They encouraged me a great deal to read, and to make something of myself. They thought it was also important because I was a boy to make something of myself. He said, "You're a black. You're going to be a black man, and you should make something of yourself. Don't be some bum like some of these other black men around here. We want to make something of yourself." And so that had a lot to do with it. I came from a very studious kind of family. People read a lot and stuff like that. So becoming a professor was not that wild a thing. One of my sisters became a high school teacher, so it wasn't. Going into education was not all that odd that I wound up going into education.
Did you find yourself clashing with the stereotypical view of black men and what you were interested in doing and what you were seeking to accomplish?
I don't think so. I mean, I think I never thought about those things too much. I mean, I never thought about race insofar as, oh, I can't do this because it's odd for a black person to do this. Or so. I never thought, I just thought like, okay, I want to do this. What do I have to do to be able to do this?
Right.
And then I just said, okay, fine. This is what you have to do to be able to do this. I'm going to do this. I would have to say I got encouragement from both black and white people in pursuing this. So I owe a lot of people a debt because black and white people both helped me. But it never occurred to me. It was never a thought in my mind at any time, oh, I'm black and I can't do this or that never occurred to me. I just thought, okay, this is what you got to do this, and I'm willing to do it. It never,
Love it.
nothing. In my upbringing, I was never told anything about there were any kind of limits on anything I can do because I was black. I was told you can do what you want.
And by the way, you two gentlemen, I believe, share a love for Cornell. Professor Dean is a Cornell undergrad. I think you did your PhD there. Is that correct?
Yes, I did my PhD at Cornell.
Ah, yes. Go Big Red. Go Big
Yeah,
Red.
yeah. I enjoyed my time at Cornell a great deal. I enjoyed the graduate school there. I enjoyed the people there. I thought it was great. I got a little tired of being in a small town, like small college town like that, and was glad to go to a big city. But I
And
enjoyed my time
and it
there.
was cold.
It was cold. Yeah, there was some winters up there. I said, "Wow, this is man, this feels like northern Canada or something." Man, it could get pretty cold up there. There were a couple of really snowy winters up there as well. Not every winter was snowy, but there were a couple that were really snowy.
Yep. Yep.
All right, I want to get into the book. I couldn't wait to get into the book. First question: how did you decide, or who decided to put Willie Mays on the cover? You had
The
so many
cover
folks you could put on the cover.
the cover was an interesting thing. we talked about what photo should go on the cover, and I said the first thing that was offered was like a team shot, a shot of a black team, a Negro League team. And I said I didn't want that because it seemed too static to me. I wanted something that had action in it. Um, and at the time we were going through this phase of the book, Willie Mays had just died. It was quite, it was like maybe weeks after uh, his death that we were going through this part of the book. And so I said, it would be nice to have an action photo. And it would be nice to have an action photo of a big black star and they came back to me with this photo of Willie Mays. And I said, "Oh, that's perfect. That's just absolutely perfect," because he had just died. And I said, "Oh, this is just." Um, I was just really touched by that because he had just died. He was a player when I was a boy um, that I remembered very well and admired terrifically. I just thought, Willie Mays was just a terrific um, role model. I mean, these men, these guys who played professional baseball, for me as a kid, they were really role models. Not because I wanted to be an athlete. I wasn't good. I played baseball a lot, but I knew I was not remotely good enough to do that for a living. Um, but the excellence that they showed and the professionalism they showed in what they did greatly inspired me. I always said to myself, I would like to be able to do something in my line of work as well as they play baseball. I would like to have that dedication to excellence that they have in what they do. And Willie Mays was just somebody I terrifically admired. So it was a no-brainer. After they showed me that photo, I said, "That's the cover."
Yeah, remarkable. A slightly different question for you, Professor.
Mhm.
Why was boxing integrated before baseball, many years before baseball? I would think, if I put my white supremacist hat on, um, I don't want black men punching and knocking out white men.
Mhm.
Hitting a baseball, okay, that's okay, but yet Jack Johnson, right, 1908, Tommy Burns in Australia. Why was boxing so much earlier than baseball?
Well, for among boxing, what people forget is that boxing was a big, big sport in the United States and in England um, um, back in the 19th century and into the 20th century. It was a huge sport. There was also just a certain set of circumstances that arose that put Jack Johnson in a position where he could fight for the title. Among other things, was that um, it was thought it was unfair to not give him a shot at the title because it was uh, poor sportsmanship. That he deserved a shot at the title. Many of the people arguing at the time said he deserves a shot at the title. I know he's black and everything, but he deserves a shot at the title. The other thing was that, look, if white men are clearly superior, then we should be able to beat him. If we are clearly superior, then we should be able to beat him. And so it was arguments like this that led to Johnson getting this shot at the title. But the thought was that he would lose, and he didn't. In 1910, when he fought Jim Jeffries, that was the real thought that he was going to lose. And then he not only didn't lose, but he beat the guy very easily. And that was the fight that gave us coined the phrase of the Great White Hope, because that's what Jim Jeffries was supposed to be. But there was things about boxing that made it interesting to have this. Boxing was like a little mini race war. You had and race was often exploited as a way to sell boxing matches, the Irish against the Jews and all this sort of stuff. And so it was a little mini race war that you had when you had boxing. And I think those are among the reasons that I think that Johnson got a crack at it and did what he did, was able to do what he did before Major League Baseball was integrated in this country. Of course, the price that was paid actually was that when Johnson lost in 1915, no black fought for the title again for about 22 years until Joe Louis fought in 1937. So, there was a price to be paid for that, with black people being not being able to compete for the title for over 20 years.
Well, I'm curious about that because you remarked that the baseball players that you observed and even the boxers, they had this certain level of professionalism. They were dedicated to excellence. What do you think they were going through? Because in fact, ironically, their excellence made them more of a target.
Hmm.
That there was almost a perverse incentive to kind of shield their talent because they feared, or I guess I'll ask you, based on your research, did they fear success and some kind of backlash if they were successful either in baseball or in boxing?
I think there was a certain kind of fear of that, of blacks possibly showing that they were superior by winning in athletic contests or things like that. But this was also the time of the age of imperialism at the turn of the 20th century. And it was probably the apex in a way about white supremacy. And so uh, it was a time when having these black men fighting was not necessarily um, was part of, I think, a whole imperialist position of, okay, we're going to give these black people, we're going to show that we're fair and giving them a shot and giving them a chance. This and only in this particular sport, um, not necessarily in any other. But this is because it was boxing was considered such a contest of masculinity, and there was so much symbolic with boxing, more so than with any other sport. There was something really symbolic about boxing at this time. um, and so it was read out in a lot of ways politically, in certain kind of ways that other sports weren't quite read out in such a way politically. So I think that's why that happened. But I also think that insofar as excellence goes, and black people being excellent, there wasn't, I would say, a real attempt to suppress expressions of black people's excellence. But at the same time, there were whites in the society who were willing to see a certain level of black excellence, or at least willing to see if black people, to give black people an opportunity to demonstrate some kind of excellence. Um, and so I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand, was that there was a willingness to see if black people could indeed project some kind of excellence. The other thing was, is can white black people really compete with whites? It was the thought at the time of the beginning of the 20th century. Oh, black people can't possibly compete with whites. In any kind of competition with whites, they would fail and so forth. But there were people interested, curious about the idea: can black people really compete with whites? And having Johnson fight, for instance, or something like that was like a kind of a test question. Can they compete? Can they win? So I think in our society, as in many others, there are always two contrasting impulses that are going on. An impulse to suppress on the one hand, but the impulse on the other hand to actually discover what levels of black excellence exist, and how are black people excellent in some ways. So I think it worked in both ways.
And going back to baseball specifically in your book, this is a question you probably can't answer, but it struck me. I even started counting at one point in the book. Why did it seem like so many Negro League baseball teams liked the word giants? There were so many versions of the giants.
Yeah, there were lots of teams that were called Giants, Cuban Giants. The funny thing about the team, that was the first major black professional team that was a powerhouse team, the Cuban Giants. There was no one on the team that was Cuban.
Right.
um, that was a funny thing about calling themselves the Cuban Giants. But in any case, I think that Giants was a popular name. I think in part because black people, a lot of these black teams wanted a name. I think that in somehow symbolized something large, something strong, something, competitive, something powerful. Giants, that's a good name, and especially if you come from a group of people you feel have been suppressed, oppressed, minimized. In some ways, black people have been minimized in society, and so giants is a way to kind of fight against you having been minimized in the society by calling yourself giant. So that's my theory about it, is that black people felt, okay, we're going to call ourselves giants. And I also think it was a good thing to do insofar as giving you a certain kind of impetus, a certain kind of psychological edge in going out and competing. I think when you're going out and competing in a sport, you need any kind of psychological edge you can get. And we're going to call ourselves giants. And, um, that might give us a little bit of an edge going out here and competing.
Understood. And going back to Ian's comment about a need to suppress excellence to sort of manage their way through the larger society. Professor, maybe you could speak a little bit about the degree of entertainment that was also kind of interwoven into Negro League Baseball. That, of course, they were playing a great game of baseball, but almost in a Harlem Globetrotters like way, as I read your book. Is that fair?
Yeah, there was elements of that, and that was a real that was an issue. The elements of what people would today call clowning in the sport. Um, Now, clowning was okay. Sometimes black teams, would start clowning or doing this kind of entertainment sort of thing, in part because black audiences wanted it. Black audiences wanted for their game. They also wanted some, as you say, entertainment, not just pure competition. They wanted some kind of entertainment. They went along with it. You can go to baseball games today and see that, and see elements of that even today. If you go to a minor league game, there's a team called the Savannah Bananas
Yes, Savannah Bananas, yeah.
that do that kind of stuff. So there's elements of that kind of stuff in the game today. So they would do this kind of clowning. Of course, for black people, this is a kind of a holdover from minstrelsy to do this sort of stuff. And so black people have mixed feelings about it. You
Yeah.
take an entertainer like Stepin Fetchit. Now, Stepin Fetchit had an act that he did before black people out in Los Angeles, before he became a movie star. And it was a very similar act to the kind of stuff he was doing on the movie screen. Now, when he was doing this kind of stuff before black audiences in black clubs in Los Angeles, black people thought it was really funny. It was when he started doing it in front of white people on the screen that it wasn't funny anymore. It's fine as a kind of intra-group thing. But when it became something that he started doing in front of white people, they said, "Oh no, no, that's not working for us, and that's not funny."
Yeah, and I
And
would
I
also,
think that
well, I was just about to say, I would also imagine if I'm playing baseball and I'm a serious baseball player, and I want to really demonstrate my talent, it's almost demeaning to then have the expectation, don't worry about it. We got to fill the seats, but we got to fill it based on, yeah, entertainment, not necessarily pure talent.
yeah, it's an issue. Players had mixed feelings about it, but they understood that the game is also a form of entertainment, whatever else it is, as a form of competition and so forth. Athletic competition is also a kind of entertainment. So there would be entertainment at these games. There would be musical presentations. The players would do all kinds of funny, fun stuff and things like that. And some of it was demeaning. I mean, it was one team that had the black players going around in grass skirts and stuff like that. So some of it was really quite demeaning, and players resented that. The other reason why there was a certain amount of clowning in the games is because black teams played against white teams, and it was not unusual for them to play before majority white audiences when they played against white teams, and they were barnstorming. If they were beating the white team and there was some sense of tension about the game because they were beating the
Oh,
white team, then they would start clowning
oh,
and acting like, "Oh, none of this is really serious. You'll have to, it doesn't really mean anything, and we're just kind, and so and by clowning, it reduced the tension. If they
so
were beating the team, it kind of reduced the tension by them clowning. And so they would sometimes do that to kind of relieve tension in games. But black people have always had, I think, an ambivalent feeling in their entertainment culture and in their artistic culture about the place of humor, the place of doing those kinds of things that have any kind of echoes of minstrelsy, and I think that's always, even up until hip hop. I mean, people have written articles about how hip hop was a new kind of minstrelsy. So that's always been on the mind of Black people about what elements in our entertainment echo minstrelsy. And so there was this echo of minstrelsy in baseball. And because people understood, because the owners and everyone understood that even with Black and white audiences in different ways wanted a certain level of entertainment. Along with the competition, they wanted a certain level of entertainment. The other thing is, of course, when you're doing the clowning or you were doing funny stuff with the bat, funny stuff with the ball and everything, in another way, it was showing how adept and how expert you were at what you were doing. As you said, you brought up the Harlem Globetrotter thing. It was showing you have to be really good to be able to do that kind of clowning. You have to be really good at what you're doing. Believe me.
So my last question, as it relates to the book, and then we'll move to the last two sections of the podcast. My last question is really my most serious, and it's one I've thought about a lot before reading your book and continue to think about it a great deal. And that is, and Ian and I have even talked about this in the past, that, true integration, right, would have been having, four or five of the Negro League teams integrate into white baseball,
Yeah.
thus retaining the Black
Mhm.
ownership of many of those
Right.
teams and the Black businesses associated with that. Was that ever considered? Did the Black owners think it was a possibility, or was that not even a consideration at the time when they started buying players from the Negro Leagues to play in white baseball?
Oh no, the Black owners did think about that. The Black owners, several Black owners. The most famous Black owner who really pressed that was a woman named Effa Manley. And that was something that was extremely important to her. But she wasn't the only one who was thinking about, oh, there would be teams that would come into baseball, Black teams that would come into baseball. They could come into baseball. They didn't even necessarily have to come in as major league teams. They could have come in as high minor league teams, and that would have been fine. And the thing is that the history of Major League Baseball is a history of when the league was challenged by new leagues. That's exactly how it dealt with dealing with the new leagues, was to integrate teams from the league into
Mm.
Major League Baseball. That's how in fact, that the American League, that's how it came into existence. It challenged the National League, and the National League absorbed it, basically. Which is kind of what happened with NFL football when it got challenged by the AFL, was that it absorbed it. It didn't do that with Black baseball, and it was one of the things I mentioned when I was one of the consultants hired by the Hall of Fame, because the book is connected with the new exhibit that the Hall of Fame has about Black baseball. And I said, the real issue here about this with the integration is not so much, Jackie Robinson's a hero and so forth. Yes, Jackie Robinson's a hero and everything. There's no problem with any of that. The problem is that there were two different expectations about the nature of integration. And Black people thought of integration as being one kind of thing. White people saw it as being, we're just going to cherry pick players that you got. And, the rest of that stuff, y'all, the rest of that stuff got nothing to do with us. And so it was actually a sign of a kind of powerlessness that Black people had, that they weren't able to integrate in the way that many of them really wanted to. My theory has always been that because Black baseball had developed as such an important business and an important aspect of Black culture, that because of the way integration took place with baseball, I think affected Black people's feelings about baseball, Black Americans' feelings about baseball over the years, which is why I think Black Americans today feel ambivalent about the game, and they aren't as into the game as you might expect they would be. I mean, that's not the only reason I'm suggesting, but I'm suggesting that as one of the reasons, is because of of the cultural memory of what baseball had been for black people in this country.
Is there a lag in popularity in baseball in the black community?
Yes, there is. Yes, there is.
Interesting.
And you know, it's that isn't true with black people in the world because they're in places like the Dominican Republic and other places, Puerto Rico and stuff like that, Mexico. Among black people in those places, baseball is very popular. Among black people in the United States, it's not nearly as popular as it once had been. Part of that is because the opening for black athletes to play in basketball and football and those sports have become very, very popular with black people. Both of those sports are more popular with black people than baseball. But also the sense that in some way, baseball gave us the biggest drama about the integration of sports. It was, Jackie Robinson, that whole story is a huge drama for American society. And I think there was a certain level of disappointment for many black people about how that came about. And it didn't come about in a way that black people thought was empowering them in some way.
Yep.
It came about in a way that actually in some ways disempowered them because my book tries to argue that black people forming these leagues and these teams is actually a huge achievement. All Americans, black, white, and every other color should be proud that black people put the kind of energy they did into play baseball. I mean, it's an amazing story. And yet the story and with integration and how it happened kind of had I don't want to say a tragic ending. That's way overstating it. Had a disappointing ending in a way. It's because in a way, black people was like the myth of Sisyphus. Black people rolled a stone up the hill, then it rolled back down. And then, Robinson got in and then, okay, integrating the front office, integrating the manager, integrating these other, we now have to roll the stone back up the hill for all these other things.
Fascinating. So well said, Professor. So, as you may know, Professor, we have a segment of really every episode that we call the speed round, where I'm going to just present to you a couple of names and ask you to pick your favorite and to tell our audience why. So we'll start with Malcolm or Martin.
Oh my goodness. I would pick Martin. Not because I didn't admire Malcolm. I thought he was one of the greatest speakers I'd ever heard. But Martin because of he had tremendous courage and because he changed his country. And he just was one of those people who really changed his country. And he had a certain kind of vision about how it could be done. And the protest that he did, and that's the thing I always say to my wife about people protesting today out in the streets and everything. I said, when those people under King protested, they actually changed hearts and minds. I mean, they actually affected people with what they were doing because you looked at them and you said, oh my God, these people are so brave. I mean, these people were sacrificing. And you don't get that sense when people are out demonstrating there. You get a sense that people are having tantrums, but you don't get a sense that they're sacrificing anything. And which shows to me that they didn't learn King's lesson. They did not learn King's lesson.
Going back to the book, of course, I have to ask you, Mays or Aaron?
Oh man, I have to go with Mays. I love Aaron. I mean, I thought Aaron was just a tremendous player, steady as a rock. I mean, year after year after year. But Mays just had this flair about him, as a player that, oh man, it was just something to see, man. I mean, when he was in his prime, he just had a flair about him, a showmanship. Aaron wasn't a showman type of guy. He was just this incredible excellence. But Mays had a real flair, real showmanship. It's he's kind of it was just something to see.
Yeah. Wow.
Last one, we're going to stick with baseball. Josh Gibson or Babe Ruth?
I love Josh Gibson, but in that equation, I have to go with Babe Ruth. The reason why I go with Babe Ruth is because Babe Ruth was a pitcher before he became a hitter. And he would have been one of the greatest pitchers of all time had he stayed a pitcher. But he was so good a hitter that they had to make him a hitter, and he became one of the greatest hitters of all time. So Josh, as great as he was not a pitcher. And so I would have to give that to Babe Ruth.
Wow. So, and so do you think Babe Ruth could have been the Otani of today?
Yes, 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 absolutely, absolutely. He could have been the Otani of today. And that was because back in those days when Ruth was playing, there was no such thing as a DH and
Right.
anything like that. If there had been a DH, they might very well have had him hit and pitch, but they just couldn't do that back then.
Right.
So he, but yeah, he was the Otani of his day.
Wow. Okay. Well, thanks for that speed round. Well, we've come to, I think it's the last question. I mean, it's been fantastic. Um, Dr. Early, you said when you were growing up, a lot of these issues around race, you never even really entertained this idea that why shouldn't I be able to do whatever it is I want to do? My race should not be an impediment. And as many of our listeners know, Nike and I started this Invisible Men podcast long time ago, centered around this concept of Daryl, a 16-year-old
Mhm,
imaginary kid living in forgotten USA, who wasn't, didn't have the benefit of seeing people like you growing up. I'm just
mhm.
curious, what advice would you give to a Daryl today as he's trying to make his way in the world? Um, yeah, what would you say to Daryl to be successful and fight off these narratives?
I think I would tell Daryl that you live in a great country, and not everybody can say that. You don't. You. I wouldn't say the country has always been good, but you live in a great country,
Mm,
in a country that will go down in history as one of the great civilizations. And you live in a great country, and the people of your skin color have had a lot to do with the country being great. And you know, don't sell yourself don't sell yourself short. And because in some ways, if you sell yourself short, you're selling short a whole lot of other black people who
mm,
achieved in this country under much more difficult circumstances than what you're facing today. I remember that John Hope Franklin, the great historian, told me once, he said, "You younger scholars, you don't have any excuses for putting out books, man. Y'all, they giving y'all a whole bunch more than they gave me when I was young. So what's your excuse?" That's why I would tell Dale, look, you got a lot more stuff than your parents had, your grandparents had, and so forth. Um, so
that's true. That's
make
it.
make use of what's there. You live in a great country. Being an American today, it's like being a Roman, man. Back in the day, having that kind of, understand that. Take
Wow.
advantage of it.
Yep. No, it's very powerful, and it's the truth. It's the truth. Wow. Okay. Well, Professor Early, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom and all the backstory of life in America and life in baseball, and actually in educating me. There were certain things about black baseball I was not familiar with, and certainly not the popularity or lack thereof within the black community.
Mm.
So, but thank you for joining us, and for our listeners, thank you for listening to another episode of The Invisible Men. Nike, I don't know if you have any parting thoughts you'd like to share.
Well, just a thank you, really a lifetime thank you to Professor Early because his contributions, as I mentioned in the introduction, are many and are broad and they are lasting. And this book for me is just another example of the lasting contributions you've made, not just to America, but to the world. And so thank you, Professor. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed our conversation very much.
Yes, thank you. Play harder, everyone. Play harder.